Hi, everyone. I know I have the last spot, so please don't fall asleep on me. I'll try to bring the energy to the room so we can all go together on this wild journey. I am really passionate about this topic, so if I giggle by myself on stage, it's just because I love it so much. I hope that today we'll go out of this presentation knowing a lot more about North Korean IT workers, who they are, why they operate the way they operate, and also how you can spot them to prevent any damage to your organization. To ease us into things, we're going to look at a real CV and a fake one. This is a real CV. I am indeed a principal threat intelligence analyst at Recorded Future, where I focus on Chinese and North Korean APTs. And prior to that, I was in PwC's Global Threat Intelligence team for 6.5 years, also with that same focus. And I love talking about APTs. This is my really not so well-kept secret. I've presented at a lot of conferences, including previously here at CyberThreat, so thank you for having me again. This is not a real CV. This is Maxim Berezhnoy, and if you looked him up on LinkedIn, you would find someone from that same name in that similar career from Odessa, Ukraine, but not this profile picture, because this Maxim Berezhnoy doesn't exist. He purports to be from Kazakhstan, and if you received his CV when trying to hire your next software developer, you would have a few cues that there is something amiss. Firstly, his photo is very clearly altered or doctored, possibly using AI. Secondly, his profile is written really strangely. He says something like, "I want to be the lodestar that always illuminates the right path," which, if you ask me, is a bit strange to write on a CV, but might be just me. Then something else that you might notice is the way his email address and his GitHub username are structured. Now, this is something that is very common with North Korean IT workers. 1 to 3 words followed by 2 to 4 digits at gmail.com or at proton.me, or just simply like that as a GitHub username. They love that. And one more thing you might notice is the computer skills. They have that kind of like progress bars or little skill trees. Are they real skills? Are they arbitrary? How do they measure that? We don't know, but they love them. So if you see that on a CV, you're like, how do you know you're that good? But this was me just plunging you right into the deep end of what one of their CVs might look like, and we're going to look at a lot more. But first, I wanted to give some acknowledgements to a lot of other brilliant researchers and groups that are very real and that have been doing incredible work on the North Korea cyber space. So please, if you don't follow them, they are definitely ones to keep an eye out for. Mitch Hazard, my colleague at Recorded Future, Michael Barnhart at DTEX, Greg Lesnowich at Proofpoint, and Dan Gordon. All of those definitely incredible researchers you should be following. North Korean IT workers. It does what it says on the tin. They are North Korean nationals with a background in computer science, software development, and they are trying to get hired in other countries in those roles while actually ever laying foot in those countries. If we go by United Nations Security Council estimates, there are up to 10,000 North Korean IT workers that are active worldwide. And they are dispatched, organized, and directed by entities linked to the North Korean government. This should tell you that their mission is quite important if the government is actually taking pains to organize their work. It is so that they can fund the regime. And the idea is that they want to have remote jobs. These typically will be remote full-time roles or contracting gigs. And they obviously want to do so while maintaining a false identity, because it is illegal to hire North Korean people. So if you were trying to get a developer on the cheap, maybe don't hire these guys. If we look at their impact just from an economic perspective, the US DOJ estimated that each worker can earn up to $300,000 per year illicitly on their own, putting the total estimated earnings at $250 to $600 million per year, much of which finds its way back to Pyongyang and to funding the regime and its nuclear and ballistic missiles programs, which is not ideal. Where they are based then? Well, some of them do operate in North Korea, others might be based in Russia, China, Vietnam, Cambodia, or Laos, still fairly geographically close to North Korea, but obviously they pretend to be from other countries, and we're going to look at a little map in a second. And how do they do this? Well, their day-to-day is essentially about maintaining fake personas, which is what I want to learn with you to spot. And then they will use those personas to apply to jobs and convince you that you should hire them. But they don't operate alone. They also have networks of front companies and facilitators that we should be keeping an eye out for so that we don't get tricked. This is just a quick overview of where they are physically based, and I've mentioned that, but also where their facilitators are based. Of course, you can imagine that they have front companies and facilitators in Russia and China, but also actually in countries you wouldn't expect. The UAE, Taiwan, Canada, the United States, Ukraine. And as to where the workers pretend to be from, what don't they pretend to be from, realistically? We've seen, a lot of them pretending to be Americans, but also, British citizens. We've seen them pretending to be from Serbia, Estonia, Poland, lots of Eastern Europe, and most recently, also South America. The clue is in the fact that if you ask them to speak the language of the country where they say they're from, they can't do that. So, always bring a multilingual individual, to the interviews with you. One of the things I am passionate about is demystifying North Korean IT workers and North Korea in general. And I get asked a lot, are North Korean IT workers an APT? And I'm like, no, not really. They are a form of illicit labor, and they serve the purpose of revenue generation for the regime. And also in the process might establish access to interesting organizations that might then become targets for espionage, but they are not your classic APT. A lot of the North Korean APT groups that we're used to are actually under the purview of the Reconnaissance General Bureau of the Korean People's Army, but the IT workers are dispatched by different entities, and quite a variety of them at that, from the Munitions Industry Department to the Ministry of Atomic Energy to, the Workers' Party of Korea's Central Committee. Their job is to make money, which is a very different remit to your classic, cyber network operations expert. And now we have seen, occasionally, some cases where operators of definitely malicious threat groups, like Purple Bravo, which we track as, which you might know as Contagious Interview, or Tag 163, which is our name for Moonstone Sleet, occasionally also dabbling on the side in IT work. And we have seen at least one Andariel operator that the US exposed that was also running an IT worker cell on the side. But does that mean that IT workers are APTs? Definitely not. Does that mean that all of these North Korean IT workers run malware and they're out to get you in that way? Not really, but they'll get you with social engineering and they want your salary. I've mentioned that they work through front companies and they have a whole ecosystem to support them. Well, that is true. So let's imagine that an entity in North Korea, like the Ministry of Atomic Energy Industry, might decide, hey, we need to run a new IT worker scheme because we need to fund our new atomic research or nuclear enrichment plant. Cool. Well, what they will do is they will set up a mission representative who has to report back to the bigwigs in Pyongyang about how the mission to make money is going. They will then possibly need to establish a front company, either in North Korea or abroad, to facilitate the movement of goods, people, money, technology. And this company will probably have a front person, a company president that sets it up in legal filings and might be the face of that company in another country. They might also integrate with logistics facilitators to ensure that the IT workers have the laptops they need, the office space they need, etc. Then there is a delegation. IT workers don't get dispatched alone, they get dispatched in teams, and each of these teams has a delegation leader who reports back to the mission leader about how it is going, out here in Vladivostok making money for North Korea. The delegation leader then supervises team leads. They're very organized. This is what I mean. They're not just individual fraudsters. They have a whole, hierarchy. The team leaders are essentially your manager. The team leader reviews your expenses. The team leader sets your targets. And the team leader also gives you feedback about your performance and that you need to put more courage in your heart and get out there on Upwork and Freelancer and bid for more jobs. They also review requests for equipment and the like, and they might do some IT work. And then the IT workers do apply for jobs, and then they actually do the work sometimes because they're trying to remain hired when they don't decide that actually they are annoyed you're trying to investigate them, and then they steal your data and try to extort you. But that's another story. So as you can see, there is quite a network of facilitators. They might buy or rent identities from people in other countries. They might even have co-conspirators that run laptop farms. Is anyone here acquainted with the concept of laptop farms, they are essentially the idea of having a location where a single individual co-conspirator might use, for example, their own home for the IT workers that get hired remotely to ship their laptops to. Because you can't just say, hey, can you ship my new corporate laptop to Pyongyang? That's going to be like a bit sus. So they're like, hey, can you send it to this random house somewhere in the middle of Pennsylvania, please? And the company's like, yeah, of course. So that's how you end up with a laptop farm. Suddenly you have 20 laptops there, and the IT workers are working remotely, logging onto those machines and then into your network. So that's how this whole scheme is set up. From companies, one example here is Shenyang DD Technology Limited, recorded feature published about this company in December 2024. This company was set up in Shenyang, which is right across the border from North Korea, and which is known to be a hotspot for North Korean IT workers. Fast forward to June 2025, one of the two founders actually got indicted in the US for aiding IT workers who could have suspected. Another one that is a bit more recent here is Investstroytrust. Now, we stumbled upon this company while we were doing research into IT workers. We were tracking this persona called Soft Angel 0090, who also goes by Small Angel 0090, and that has just a bunch of different personas across GitHub and freelancer sites. And this was definitely an IT worker. Like they had AnyDesk installed and were AnyDesking into machines in the US. They were looking up US remote jobs for Golang software developer. And what we found, cross-referencing open source information with an information stealer log, because this particular persona had gotten compromised by an info stealer, was that we could find the IP address that they were operating from, which was this 188.43.33.252. And we're like, what is it? Is it a proxy? Is it some kind of like home router? What is it? Well, it was an IP geolocated in Russia, belonging to Transtelecom, and assigned to this host name that said investstroytrust-gw.transtelecom.net. And we're like, what is this? Is this, some kind of organization? Well, it's a company. So we're like, we can't possibly have just stumbled on a front company like that. So we had to do some more digging. It was too exciting. What we found out is that Trend Micro had actually published a great blog on that same net blog from .249 to .253 as being actually involved in the activity of North Korean IT workers. So we were definitely on the right track. And then, and this was, kind of to John's point that you should read before you go on to a whole rabbit hole, that actually Tim Cumbry had posted a tweet saying, hey, there's this really dodgy company, Transtelecom, some of these IP addresses are doing bad stuff, you should look out for them. And I was like, yes, I knew it. So what we also found out, just in case any of you ever needs to investigate Transtelecom IP addresses, is that the company still uses an antiquated way of assigning net blocks. So they'll assign contiguous net blocks to individual corporate customers, and these act as gateways for NATed internal networks. So that's kind of like the setup they would imagine in a small office. All of the IT workers hiding behind this NATed network will exit from the same 5, 6 gateway IP addresses. So you can imagine that you can pivot onto a lot more bad there. And this is how we got to assess that likely either Investstroytrust is a DPRK IT worker front, or it is at minimum providing its infrastructure some kind of proxy for rental setup. Enough about that. What does an IT worker GitHub look like? It looks like this. This is a great example. This is my friend, Blue0316, that I found a few months back. He also goes by Great Blue Knight. And if you are planning to hire a software developer or an IT administrator or similar, very often along with their CV, they'll send you their GitHub to showcase all of the work they've done in the past. So this is a perfect example of some of the patterns you might encounter. So we've talked about the name. It's 1 to 3 words with 2 to 4 digits followed by that. The usernames will also have keywords like dev or code or software with some adjectives that indicate, genius or reliability. They love to call themselves like code wizard or, smart developer. And I'm like, who decides that? That's very subjective right there. but that's what they like to call themselves. The profiles also include very often that little waving hand emoji and lots of emojis in general. Now, that is kind of the typical GitHub introduce yourself template, but they use a lot of emojis. And something else to keep an eye out for is this structure with almost this like skill tree that lists all of the technologies that they are allegedly proficient in, which are definitely too many for a normal human. And they will also say something like, I am employed at home. I am employed at individual developer. And you're like, thank you very much. That's very useful. Remember also that we talked about those progress bars or skill trees on their CV. You can see them replicated here. Now, let's say that you find a GitHub profile, and you're like, OK, what else can I find about this persona if I'm trying to check that it's a real person? Well, you would find that blue0316's email address is mycreative0090, I think, or 0908@gmail.com. And if you search that in Google, literally, you'll find the profile of a person called Mike Limones. Now, the chances are that if you received a CV linking you to blue0316's GitHub, their name was probably not Mike Limones, and so you would already know that there is something fishy going on there. And another example you would find still through Google is that mycreative0908 is also in a very different GitHub profile with also an image that is not a real person called Fantasy Night. So you're like, OK, wait, hold on. I'm starting to lose track of all the names, but you already know that something doesn't quite add up. Now, to further unspool this thread, you could decide, I want to look into Fantasy Night's followers, followed accounts, and starred repositories. You would find these two beautiful profiles up here. You would find a humorous guy and code wizard. And just at a glance, you would be able to see that they have very similar looking profiles to the one we've seen for Great Blue Night. Again, lots of emojis, the same pattern in names, and profile pictures that are never a real person. It's either an AI-generated picture, or it is a cartoon character. They love Naruto. They love Minions. If you have ever watched Despicable Me and you know about the Minions and you see a Minion in a GitHub CV, run to your security team and be like, we have a problem. We have a problem. So, just from one indicator, like one profile, you see that you can start to unspool a very big thread. If you continued pulling on that, your Matigo graph would absolutely, crash on you, so I don't recommend. But it's very, very easy to pivot in that way. I've mentioned name patterns, so I will just breeze through this, but something I will say is that they are really formulaic. They are easy to reject. They're easy to hunt for in your environment, to hunt for proactively. And also, if you're a hiring manager, just looking at a quick glance, and you're like, oh, that's a suspicious username, I'm maybe going to keep a little red flag at the back of my head when I look at this person's application. And likewise, I've mentioned how to spot them on GitHub. I realized that none of those on its own is enough to say this person is definitely a North Korean IT worker. But when you start adding up all of those characteristics, then you can get more confidence that at least there is something that you want to look into. What else other than GitHub? Well, it is possible to go from their GitHub profile to other profiles where they have personas. In this case, you have here Tadao Minami, or partner 0307. And if you look him up online, you'll find that his email is iris.minami@gmail.com. So it has a different email account, and it has Figma accounts and all sorts of other freelancing accounts. Also, if you pivoted into Tadao Minami's followers, you'll find this other profile, Hashi7412, which also has a Naruto character anime profile, which looks weird. It's a strange name, and it very coincidentally just happens to have the same kind of background profile picture, which is a bit strange. And Hashi, you'll be able to find, also has a persona called Kenzo Suzuki. And so you're like, I'm so confused. Is this Tadao? Is it Iris? Is this Kenzo? Who am I actually speaking with in this interview that is coming up? These should definitely be red flags. I want to spend some time talking about the tools that North Korean IT workers use. Before they get hired in their day-to-day, and after they get hired, which is something that if you ever suspect you might have accidentally hired an IT worker, you might want to hunt in your logs for, because it can happen. So before they get hired, they use a lot of browser management tools because they have so many personas they can't keep track of them themselves. They sometimes make mistakes. They use tools like Enhanced CV to generate their CVs in a programmatic way. And by the way, that is absolutely something you can go and check in the CVs you have received if Enhanced CV was used or similar tools. They use a lot of AI tools, and I don't mean just ChatGPT and other LLMs, but they also use AI image software, for example, to retouch their profile pictures, but also even to alter their video feeds during interviews, because maybe they want to distort their facial features and look a bit different. And also they use voice altering software to kind of get rid of that accent that might give them away. Something that is a bit of like a smoking gun is if you find these binaries, CallRI.exe or CallRT.exe or Netkey.exe. Those are North Korean-specific binaries, some of which are used by the IT workers to communicate with each other, but also to connect back to the internet in North Korea. Now, after they get hired, definitely hunt in your logs for any suspicious connections from Astro VPN and IP Royal, especially if these are tools that are not allowed or default in your organizations because they love those. DPRK and IT workers and Astro VPN is the best love story since Twilight. They absolutely love using remote control tools like AnyDesk or TeamViewer, and also PyKVM or TinyPilot and other KVM tools, because effectively they need to be able to log remotely into those machines. And how can they command them remotely if they don't have AnyDesk installed or something like that? So, if you're not expecting something like that to show up on your corporate device or to be connected to your corporate device, definitely, ring some bells that something is going on. Likewise, if your new contractor or your new hire is like, hey, can you pay me in crypto, man? You're like, no. Absolutely not. Or can you pay me through digital money? Can you pay me via Wise or digital transfer or something like that? You should also say possibly not if that is in your procedures, because that's a way that they evade the checks that the financial system might have in place to verify that they are real people or to verify that the money doesn't go to sanctioned entities. I mentioned that there are some connections between IT workers and some actually malicious threat groups that are APTs in the more general sense. So this is one of them. PurpleDelta is how at Recorded Future we track IT workers versus PurpleBravo, which is our name for contagious interview. This is a really simple distinction to make. Everyone mixes them up. Some vendors track them as the same, such as famous Shalima, but they're different. Here's why. DPRK IT workers want to get hired. They want you to pay them money to do work. PurpleBravo, contagious interview, instead poses as a recruiter. So they want to fake recruit you and infect you with coding challenges because they want to steal your cryptocurrency. So they are the opposite sides of the coin. They are really not the same. And also, North Korean IT workers might, for example, attempt to extort you if they have stolen your data and they catch the scent that you're onto them. In some cases, they might even attempt to deploy ransomware, but they typically really don't use malware. Contagious Interview, PurpleBravo, has a really big suite of custom malware at its disposal. You might have heard of Invisible Ferret or Beavertail, Golan Ghost. Those are two different intrusion sets. IT workers and PurpleBravo are different, but there are some overlaps. And here is how. Sometimes you might have a PurpleBravo malware and campaign operator that is also dabbling in IT work on the side just to round up those bills. So, for example, in September, Sentinel-1 released details about 100up2023@gmail.com. This was an email address that they found on a contagious interview server, so definitely this persona was involved in distributing malware to its targets. But then we were looking it up in Recorded Future Identity. Lo and behold, we find another InfoStealer log. These people download so much cracked software with InfoStealers, you wouldn't believe it. And we found that this was another IT worker. They had Astro VPN, they had AnyDesk, they had CallRI.exe, they were applying for remote development jobs in the US. They had this lazy apply browser extension to automatically fill in Indeed forms and job applications online, which I thought was hilarious. And actually, if you pivoted from their personas, one of which is Rico Gonzalez, you would find that they're following other IT workers who are following other IT workers on GitHub, and so it goes. So you definitely find those points of overlap between operations. Another point of difference is between PurpleDelta and what Microsoft calls Moonstone Sleet. Now, PurpleDelta DPRKT workers pose as candidates to get hired. Moonstone Sleet is another of those North Korean APTs that wants to hire you, allegedly, until they send you a job description that has malware. They primarily go after the aerospace and defense sector, as well as technology and manufacturing organizations. And again, while PurpleDelta typically doesn't use malware, Moonstone Sleet has a lot of backdoors at its disposal, including ones that previously belonged to Diamond Sleet, also known as Zinc. The malware family is known as Comebacker. They have deployed custom ransomware before, and some operators of Moonstone Sleet had the brilliant idea of being like, what if we also run an IT worker scheme? Then our bosses would really like us. So that is actually what is happening. We're still investigating the extent to which they overlap and the extent to which there is direct collaboration between APTs and IT workers. But for now, they're quite separate in scope. Now, DPRKT workers are adapting to public exposure. It used to be the case that, if you invited them to an interview, unwittingly, not knowing that they were an IT worker, they would be like, no, I don't do video interviews, I'm a star. I cannot possibly be on video. But obviously that is quite suspicious. Like, if you're a normal person and you're trying to get a job, why wouldn't you go onto a video interview? What's stopping you? So now they're getting wise to the fact that that's a red flag in hiring. So they do show up. But they show up with a lot of virtual backgrounds that obscure the fact that they are in a crowded room with half a dozen other IT workings beavering away in the background. And they might use those AI tools to alter their facial features. Not only, in the past, they would not be prepared about their own cover story. They'd say, oh yeah, I'm from London, and then not be able to say literally any single monument based in London, like not know any neighborhood, and you'd be like, right, man, okay. But now they prepare these little briefings for themselves. It's great, where they know they know the time zone. So if you ask them what time zone they're in, they can answer, because they don't know. So how can you catch them out? Well, one example is that, first of all, you can ask them to move. You can ask them to pass a hand over their face. You can ask them to turn off their virtual background. I know it's a bit rude, but it's probably less rude than having an IT worker in your network. You can also ask them to, lift up their phone and show the date and time, because they might not have thought about changing that, and you might see that actually they are in East China time, and you're like, right, but you told me you live in Texas. So these are the small things that might give them away. What's coming next? In the first instance, and there have been quite a few brilliant blogs written about this development, they're now hiring their collaborators. So not only are they trying to get hired, they're also trying to hire collaborators to be like, I will pay you money if you go and do this interview for them. You don't need to know anything about development. I'll give you the answers. You just have to show up and be the face. And also, can you join my weekly stand-up calls if I get hired, so that they continue seeing you instead? And I've got a team of 5 people to do the IT work, so you don't have to know absolutely anything about debugging. So that is something that they're doing, and it's quite dangerous, because then that removes that layer of who am I actually employing. Not only, less relevant for cyber, but they are not only doing IT work. They are applying to positions like civil engineering, product and project management. So the question is, what's next? Is your next SOC analyst or cybersecurity manager going to be a North Korean IT worker? And also, there is still the question of to what extent are they already or might be compelled in the future to hand over their access to organizations of strategic interest in North Korea to other proper APTs that can do, can be the A-team and perform espionage or disruption or whatever else. I know this has been a bit of a whistle-stop tour of all things North Korean IT workers, but I've given you quite a few red flags that you can think of at any step of the hiring process. So what else can you be on the lookout for? Well, if there are inconsistencies in their background stories, if they say that they're called Rico Gonzalez and suddenly they are Tadao Minami, they are not the same person and that person doesn't exist. Or if they told you that their address was A and then they say, hey, can you ship my laptop to B instead or to a random PO box, then probably you should double check that, that person is well-meaning, because there might be something afoot there. If they cannot sign personally for delivery, or if they can't ever, for any reason, come to the office, that is also a problem. So if practicable, if you have a suspicion that that person might not be real, be like, hey, you live in Manchester, can you come down to our office in London? We'll pay for your travel. I guarantee they won't show up because they are in North Korea. There are also applicable mitigations that you can take, from creating Yara rules to scan their CVs for very common patterns, to things that I mentioned during the interview to catch them out. You can really ask your own third parties, if you use them, or your in-house HR team to conduct thorough background checking. Like, they should not be letting pass IDs that have been clearly photoshopped with the skill of a 15-year-old. That should not be possible. And also, maybe do give that training to your HR team. Do like a small webinar about this threat and why it's important they are on the lookout for that. And after hiring, as I've said, there is a lot that you can do to threat hunt for suspicious activity. Some final takeaways from me. They are a global threat with a global reach and a global remit. And if you think that you're fine here in the UK, that you have got great defenses, nothing is ever going to come to your organization, that's great. But have you ever thought about your subsidiary in another country? Are they up to the same standard as you? And if not, then maybe you need to be asking yourself that question. This is activity that is highly likely to continue. Their job is to make money for the regime. The regime is under international sanctions, so they will need to continue making money. It's not going to stop tomorrow. It's not going to stop next year. And even if it evolves, this is going to continue being a threat. And likewise, these are fake people, but the risks are very real. You risk legal repercussions from financing sanctioned entities. You risk reputational repercussions. This is an insider threat that has access to your confidential information, and if they decide to leak that, as we heard in talks yesterday, there could be quite some reputational damage if that was exposed. But also, these could be the door openers to ransomware operations or APT operations, and those are quite nasty to have to deal with in the aftermath. So as funny as it all is, you have to keep in mind that this is a very real threat, but one that is combatable. So because I love talking about this topic, that was me, but I'd love to hear your questions now or at the break. So let's chat. Thank you for having me again.
Wow, thank you so much. That brilliant content and the energy that certainly revived me, and probably everybody else. I swear it's scaring us pretty witless. We do need to go to the break, but there's been quite a few questions. Let me try and summarize them in one.
Yes.
Nobody's trying to recruit these people.
Yeah.
So, and you've mentioned a whole bunch of things as to how it works. What's the most effective techniques they use to bypass the normal controls that companies use in HR? Why does it work? What's the most important thing in making this whole racket work?
I think there are a couple of things. So firstly is your HR tends to assume that people are in good faith trying to get hired. And to be fair, they are trying to get hired, but for illicit purposes. And secondly is they definitely bypass those background checks because the background checks aren't strong enough.
Right.
And so, people look over the inconsistency, they look over the fact that the CV and the GitHub and the story just doesn't match up. And there is also kind of like no linkage between HR and security. And I think that is the one thing to solve in this case, because this is as much as a technology problem as it is a human problem. You have to be able to sync in with your HR and to be like, hey, anytime there is anything suspicious, you can let security know. If you're uncertain, I'd much rather you tell the SOC or you tell the cybersecurity team than just let it go through.
Brilliant. Okay, well, Sveva, thank you for bringing one of the most remarkable stories in modern cybersecurity alive. Sveva, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kieran. Thank you all.